Today we're going to be looking at Battlefield Hardline, comparing it on the Potato Masher and the PlayStation 4. If you don't know what the Potato Masher is, it's a $350 PC custom built in November of 2014 and designed to compete against the PlayStation 4 for the rest of its life cycle. Now a parts list and a link to the build video are in the description of this video, as well as a download link to the full high quality version of this video if you would like to download it and pixel peep along for this comparison. Now, most of the time when we do these comparison videos, both versions of the game look very comparable. The PlayStation 4 usually looks like the medium to medium high version of the PC, and we really have to talk about other things like frame rates and extra resolutions in order to draw a definitive winner. In Battlefield Hardline, that is not the case. Battlefield Hardline runs at 60 FPS on the PlayStation 4, which is good, but it runs at 900p, and the resolution difference is extremely noticeable. It's also extremely noticeable that the PlayStation 4 version has much lower resolution textures, absolutely no anti-aliasing compared to the 2X I was running on very high settings on the PC, and it cannot hold a candle to the PC. Even running on a cheap budget build like the Potato Masher, the PC version is head and shoulders better than the PlayStation 4. And this is most noticeable when it comes to textures and anti-aliasing. Things like power lines being just jaggy blocks of nothingness off in the distance, things like texture pop-in and flicker on the PlayStation 4 version, things like particle effects just being much softer and blurrier. It's very obvious that the PlayStation 4 version is a lower quality, lower resolution version, upscaled to match the resolution of the PC. And unfortunately, it does not get any better when you go into multiplayer. Now multiplayer, again, both games are running at 60 FPS, which is good, but the PlayStation version has been hit with the ugly stick. Without being too hyperbolic, to me the PlayStation version looked almost like an early PlayStation 3 version of a multiplayer shooter, not something coming out in 2015. Now, some things are still nice, the models still look good, there's still good lighting effects, but compared to the PC version, the PlayStation 4 version looks pretty bad in multiplayer, except when it comes to things like the gun models, which are still pretty well done. But I mean, just everything looks muddy and nasty, and there's terrible aliasing on everything. When it comes to the visuals, the PC version of Battlefield Hardline is noticeably and definitively superior. Well, 1080p is good and everything, but what if you want to play at 1440p or 4K? Can the Potato Masher handle that? Well, if you leave everything at the high settings on 1440p, it cannot maintain 60 FPS. It will stay in the high 50s and even approach 60 some of the time, but it will drop as low as the mid 30s when a lot of action happens. And that is a little bit noticeable when you're playing. You don't notice frame rate drops of 5 FPS or so, but you notice it when it drops almost in half. Good news is you can lower all the settings to low and it stays at a pretty rock solid 60. Occasionally it will dip into the mid 50s, but like I said, you don't really notice those drops at all. The PlayStation 4 version also dips like that from time to time. And even though it's on the lowest settings when you do this, it actually still looks pretty fantastic, as you can see. I would say low at 1440p on a Potato Masher looks significantly better than the PlayStation version of the game. Even though the PlayStation version of the game is technically running on higher settings most likely than low, its resolution is much lower than 1440p at only 900p, and that difference is very evident. Now, most people like playing shooters of any kind at 60 FPS. But if you don't want to play at 60 FPS, or if you would just like a little more visual quality and you're okay sacrificing 60 FPS, you can play at 1440p with everything on the highest settings at 30 FPS. Yes, this is half the frame rate of the PlayStation 4 version, so it's probably not for everyone, but if 30 FPS honestly doesn't bother you, especially for things like the campaign when you're not competing against other people and you want to try it out, the game looks fantastic on 1440p with everything on the highest visual settings, so I'd highly recommend trying it at least. Now, if you want a game at 4K, unfortunately things aren't quite as good. I know the Potato Masher version has been doing very well up till now, but 4K is a little bit of a problem. you can kind of play at 30 FPS with everything on the lowest settings. 60 is a pipe dream, although the frame rate will sometimes get as high as 40, maybe 45 FPS. It's never going to get to 60. That's just the reality of it. But if you want to play at 4K, it is technically possible, just at low frame rates and with a little bit of occasional frame stutter. And if you're thinking, well, what's the big deal with playing at these higher resolutions anyway? Why is it so difficult? Well, here is to scale the game playing at 720p as if you bought the Xbox One version. Here it is playing at 900p like if you had the PlayStation 4 version. Here is 1080p, 1440p, and finally 4K. So as you can see, the Potato Masher can push many more pixels than either of the consoles, and even though it can't play on the highest settings at 1440p at 60 FPS, and it can't play at 4K at really anything approaching awesome frame rates, it's still a pretty awesome accomplishment that it can play them, period, especially for such a cheap computer. And as I like to say, if you're gaming at 4K with the Potato Masher, your monitor probably costs more than the computer you're playing it on. Battlefield Hardline is a pretty good looking and a pretty great running game on the Potato Masher. It's noticeably better than Battlefield 4. It doesn't have the famous memory leak issue, and it just seems to be a bit more refined, although I can't say it really has that much visual improvement in some areas. I think it may not look quite as good as Battlefield 4. Still, it's visually a fairly impressive game, although I can't say the PlayStation version is anything special. In fact, I think it's one of the worst looking PlayStation Battlefield games in quite some time, but if you absolutely must play it on the PlayStation, have fun. Otherwise, I would highly recommend playing this on the PC, and it is another definitive win for the Potato Masher.